Well, folks, the wait is almost over. The NASA Perseverance rover is just about ready to make its journey to the Red Planet to search for life and answer that most ancient of questions once and for all: are we alone? This rover is equipped with a whole variety of different instrumentation, much of it designed to detect life. Well, not exactly active life, not exactly anything that's alive now, but rather the signs of ancient life. And when it comes to answering the question of whether or not life actually exists elsewhere, it's probably not going to answer it. Because you see, the Perseverance is based almost entirely on the Curiosity rover. In fact, some of it is made out of spare parts, and all of that was done in order to save money. There are no microscopes on this rover, nothing that is going to definitively say whether or not life exists on the Red Planet. Instead, it's going to store soil samples, and hopefully, in a decade or so, we'll be able to retrieve them and take a good look at them here on Earth. That is our current plan for finding life on the Red Planet. Another 10 years of waiting. Does it really have to be this way? See, the problem is that NASA is not expecting to find any large colonies of bacterial life. On the contrary, all they're expecting to find is vague indications of life that may have existed in the past, or perhaps some sort of subtle biosignatures that will in no way prove the existence of life until they can get the soil samples safely back to Earth. That's what they're assuming. And unless the pixel camera, which is designed to examine things in fine detail, detects a large colony of bacterial life, we're not going to learn a definitive answer at all in 2021. And that's going to be the case with the Tianwen rover as well, which successfully launched recently and is scheduled to set down sometime in February of 2021. Now, the Chinese expedition is going to be setting down somewhere in the Utopia Planitia, which coincidentally is where Elon Musk is planning to set up one of his Martian colonies, or one of his preferred sites anyway. And it's comprised of a rover, a lander, and an orbiter with a tremendous amount of equipment to examine the soil, ground-penetrating radar to look for ice, all sorts of things. And yet, no instruments to definitively tell whether or not large colonies of bacteria might exist. But then, if there are no large colonies whatsoever on Mars, or no reason to believe that there are, then what's the point to look for them, right? But the thing of it is, way back in the 1970s, we found very definitive proof, which has been backed up by further discoveries recently, that has demonstrated that there very probably is bacterial life in large quantities on the Martian surface. As a matter of fact, the man who headed up the program believes that his experiments to this day definitively proved the existence of Martian bacterial life, and he is very opposed to the idea of returning samples from Mars. And by the way, when we're talking about life off planet, extraterrestrial civilizations are a big issue as well. And if we determined someday that they were to exist, that would be a big deal for the exploration of the solar system, and particularly to SpaceX. Why is this the case? Well, if someday we picked up a signal that we defined as being definitely from an extraterrestrial source, then there would be a big incentive to explore the solar system looking for any evidence of past expeditions made to our neck of the woods. Because after all, given the immense age of the solar system and the probability of large amounts of extraterrestrial life out there, there's a decent chance that they may have visited us at some point in the past. And where better to find evidence of such things than on planets like Mars or places like the Moon, where evidence doesn't tend to get wiped out by erosion and tectonic plates. But in spite of what the majority of the scientific community might tell you, we have actually picked up signals which bear a great resemblance to exactly what we've been looking for as far as extraterrestrial life is concerned. And on top of that, quite a number of phenomena throughout the cosmos which has been very difficult to explain. Get ready for a very unusual episode of The Angry Astronaut. Good evening, and welcome to another episode of The Angry Astronaut, a very special episode commemorating 10,000 subscribers. When I started this channel less than 7 months ago, I never thought in my wildest dreams that I would be at this point this quickly. It completely blows my mind, and thank you very, very much. And at the end of this episode, I'll be recognizing some folks who made a very, very big difference towards the success of this channel. But in the meantime, this is going to be a special episode because the topic is going to be unconventional, at least for me, because I'm going to be talking about alien life and also extraterrestrial intelligence. Now, that may be way off base from what I usually talk about, but actually, I think that it's extremely relevant to what I usually talk about, and that is SpaceX and the Starship, because we are going to be putting 2 probes down on the surface of Mars in 2021. And whereas those probes are not going to be looking for intelligent life, I feel that there is a strong possibility that they are going to discover evidence of bacterial life at the very least. And once this happens, all of the space agencies on this planet are going to be incredibly interested in sending humans to follow up on this discovery. And it's going to be something that will benefit SpaceX tremendously because they have the ship that is most likely to be able to reach the red planet and explore it in the shortest amount of time and bring the largest amount of personnel and equipment. And I think that they will receive very sizable contracts from a variety of different space agencies to follow up and send humans to the red planet. So this is an important thing, a big game changer for Elon Musk and his hopes to explore and colonize the red planet. But all of that having been said, if these probes do indeed discover evidence of life, the evidence that they have had better be ironclad, because way back in 1976, the man in charge of the Viking experiments specifically designed to find alien life determined, in his opinion, that he had found it, that there were bacterial life of some, or there was bacterial life of some type on the Martian surface, and he had a great deal of evidence to prove it. And since then, evidence has continued to mount to support his position, and yet the majority of the scientific community does not support his findings. And not only that, there's also been evidence throughout the solar system of at least simple life existing, many, many discoveries having piled up over the years. Plus, in addition to that, substantial evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence. And I'm not talking about UFOs here. I'm talking about things that can be quantified, measured, put in a laboratory, and confirmed. and there is a tremendous amount of evidence, some of it less convincing than others, that strongly indicate that extraterrestrial life does exist. And nevertheless, the scientific community is far from convinced. And I have to say, by the time we reach the end of this episode, and I present to you all the evidence that we've discovered over the years, you may be about as angry as I am about it. So let's get right to it. Now, some of you may have seen information about this in my previous videos, but bear with me because I have a lot of other stuff here. This is Dr. Gilbert Levin, who headed up the life experiments aboard the Viking lander way back in 1976. And in the 1990s, he published a paper where he concluded that his experiments had definitely detected the presence of microbial life on Mars. And he wasn't just basing this on some sort of crackpot theories, but rather on very sound scientific principles that were tested extensively on Earth before the Viking was deployed to Mars. By the way, nothing similar to this experiment or nothing upgraded has been introduced since, but the idea was to introduce a variety of different nutrients and oxygen into the Martian soil to see if anything would metabolize it, and to the surprise of the researchers, something did. And then they heated the soil to determine whether or not that would slow down the process, and again, to their surprise, that happened. Now, when these experiments were carried out on Earth, they never produced a false positive. Now, given that these experiments produced the same results at both Viking locations, even though they were separated by thousands of kilometers, it would suggest that bacterial life is not only present on the red planet, but also abundant. Now, other theories have come forward. For example, the discovery of perchlorates would suggest that a perchlorate-laden soil might also consume the materials that were introduced. But if the soil was heated, this would not have changed the situation with the perchlorates producing this false positive. It would have been exactly the same. So that shoots down that theory, and there are no other natural explanations that have been brought forward to date. But the one flaw in the experiments was the fact that no organic molecules were detected, which they should have been if there had been life present. However, in 2013, the Curiosity rover, using a much more sensitive piece of equipment, did detect organic molecules, which the Viking instruments were not really designed to detect anyway. So when it comes right down to it, with all of these factors being combined, there is no natural explanation that can be brought up to explain all of these factors. Bacterial life must exist on Mars, and this is not the only evidence. Substantial quantities of methane have also been detected in the Martian atmosphere, which could have been produced by one of two things: either volcanism that we're not familiar with on Mars, or organic life. Now, if it's volcanism, then it should be something constant year-round, and yet it's seasonal, and there seems to be no evidence of seasonal volcanic activity on Mars. So it's either a natural process that we don't understand, or more likely, something alive that's producing the methane. And yet this still isn't everything. In addition to that, a large quantity of oxygen has recently been discovered in the Martian atmosphere as well. And the reason this is important is because there's bacteria on Earth that can naturally consume perchlorates and produce oxygen as a byproduct. And if it happens on Earth, it could certainly happen on Mars. It is an excellent example of why there's so much oxygen in the atmosphere. And yet, this still isn't everything. Dr. Levin also points out that given the high degree of bombardment that the Martian atmosphere receives from cosmic rays, the carbon dioxide atmosphere should have been converted into carbon monoxide long ago, unless there was something replenishing the CO2. namely something consuming oxygen and converting it into CO2, namely something alive. If all of this evidence were gathered on Earth and presented to a board of scientific experts, there would be no question that this would be sufficient proof for life. But since these experiments were performed on Mars, it is held to a different standard, and that is absolutely absurd. Instead, aside from a vocal minority who support Dr. Levin, the majority believe that the extreme cold and the radiation on Mars is enough to prevent life from developing, even though there are examples of bacterial life on our own planet that can survive extreme cold and extreme radiation. In my opinion, the Perseverance should use its pixel camera, which is capable of examining things in great detail, to find the colonies of bacterial life that I'm certain are present. But Mars is not the only location in our solar system that shows strong evidence of extraterrestrial life. As a matter of fact, the moon of Europa may have even more compelling evidence. As most of us know, scientists are convinced that beneath the icy surface of Europa lies a salty ocean, kept in a liquid form by the strong tidal forces from Jupiter. But this is not, of course, enough evidence to demonstrate life. Instead, the clue lies in the brown staining in the many cracks on the surface. In the early 2000s, a researcher named Brad Dalton took infrared readings of this staining and determined that it was almost identical to a variety of types of algae that thrive around volcanic vents deep beneath the Earth's oceans, the type of algae one would expect to find in Europa's oceans. But this was not sufficient. He then took a variety of different types of bacteria, including one called D. radiodurans, and exposed it to similar conditions that would exist on Europa. Now, D. radiodurans is one of the most incredible forms of life on Earth. It's resistant to incredibly high levels of radiation, extreme cold, and even vacuum. And it has been theorized that it is not even from here at all, but rather a bacteria that's been transplanted from Mars because it is so radically different from everything else on our planet. Now, this of course is hotly debated, but if D. radiodurans did evolve here on Earth, then it's a serious case of evolutionary overkill. No bacteria on Earth would need to evolve such an extreme resistance to radiation, further reinforcing the idea that there is indeed something alive on Mars. Nevertheless, back to Europa. Once these bacteria were exposed to Europa-like conditions, spectral analyses were taken of them, and they proved to be almost identical to the spectral analysis taken by the Galileo spacecraft of the Europa staining. An amazing coincidence, to say the least, although not exactly the same. Now, it has been proposed that the staining could be caused by a variety of different salts, as would be expected in a Europa ocean. However, these salts would be white, not brown. Europa is quite unique in this regard. It has also been proposed that the moon of Io is depositing sulfur on the surface of Io. This would make a great deal more sense if it were not for the fact that Io tends to deposit its sulfur on the trailing edge of Europa's surface because of the strange orbits of the Jovian moons. Therefore, it should not exist across the surface of the planet, and yet it does. Up to this point, there has been no natural explanation that stands up for the odd staining of Europa's cracks, and yet, after 20 years, we still don't have a mission to this strange world, although we finally will with the Europa Clipper, which will arrive sometime in the near future. Hopefully, this will put this particular debate to rest. I could go on and on about various objects in the solar system that are likely to host life. There are quite a few of them, but I think I'd like to get off track a little bit and talk about something else that passed through our solar system that did not come from here, but rather from an interstellar destination. This is, of course, the object known as Oumuamua, and if it is something that is natural, it is the strangest natural object to ever pass through our solar system. It has a length to width ratio that is unlike anything in the solar system. It does not behave like an asteroid or a comet. It has a high level of reflectivity, and there is something else about it that was truly unique and cannot be explained away by any natural causes. On its way out of the solar system, Oumuamua mysteriously began to accelerate. Now, this could have been caused by cometary outgassing if it were a comet, but if it were a comet, it would have produced a tremendous cometary tail when it was close to the sun, and we would have observed it. But it didn't. And so, bereft of any kind of explanations, a Harvard scientist by the name of Dr. Loeb proposed the idea that this mysterious object was not natural at all, but in fact an alien light sail, and produced a great deal of mathematical proof to indicate that its movement and acceleration coincided with a light sail rather than some sort of asteroid. Almost immediately, Dr. Loeb's theories were attacked, and sometimes he was personally attacked online. At the very best, his colleagues said that this was a vague possibility, but that natural explanations were far, far more likely, although they couldn't come up with any natural explanations except for perhaps there was some ice that somehow had magically escaped being evaporated when Oumuamua was close to the sun, and instead outgassed when it was a very great distance away from the sun. A completely preposterous notion, but one that seems to be the predominant theory about Oumuamua to this day. But if you want to hear something truly preposterous, you have to look to 1977 when we received the famous WOW signal as part of the SETI program. This was a narrow-band transmission that took place near the frequency that coincides with the hydrogen line, which of course is the most common element in the universe and universally believed to be the frequency that an alien civilization would transmit on. We received it, and an explanation came out shortly thereafter saying that it was a natural result of emissions from a comet. But this explanation was quickly debunked because comets emit radio transmissions that are of a much wider band and much weaker than the WOW signal, and if they did emit these kinds of signals, we would have detected them from comets a long time ago, and yet the mainstream media continues to produce these sorts of explanations almost to this day. So the WOW signal would appear to be our first extraterrestrial contact, except for the fact that it did not repeat, and SETI requires that a signal repeat, otherwise they do not regard it as being genuine, which in my opinion is completely arbitrary. And, as most people do not know, there have been over 20 other signals on a narrow band without any easy natural explanation that have been received by SETI since then, but none of them have repeated, and so therefore none of them have been regarded as valid, even though we do not have any natural explanations for them. But here's the preposterous part. In 1974, the Arecibo radio telescope sent out a famous signal to the star cluster of M13 with the intention of establishing contact with any intelligent civilization that might be there. Now, there are a number of ridiculous things about this. First of all, globular clusters like M13 are highly unlikely to have intelligent civilizations because the stars are so closely compacted that any supernova or other events would tend to wipe out any nearby civilizations. On top of that, the star cluster is 25,000 light years away. And finally, did the signal repeat? Well, of course it didn't. So, any alien species that receives this 25,000 years from now, if they're as narrow-minded as we are, they will dismiss this signal because it didn't repeat. And by the way, for all we know, the WOW signal did repeat. The radio telescope in question has to be pointed directly at the source of the transmission in order to receive it. We did listen for some time and did not receive a signal, but nevertheless, the WOW signal could have repeated yesterday or 10 years ago, and we never would have heard it. So perhaps it's not a fact that we're not receiving signals, we just aren't listening enough. Or perhaps we aren't looking hard enough. A famous techno-signature that is commonly looked upon as evidence for extraterrestrial life is when a large amount of material mysteriously disappears from a stellar system, perhaps because it's being mined or used by the aliens for some other purpose. And the strangely named star system TYC 8241 2652 was clearly observed with a large debris disk or dust disk, which is not uncommon for a star system that's in its developing stage. But a few decades later, the disk was gone, utterly vanished, and the only natural explanations for something like that might be a black hole or a neutron star or something with an immense gravitational pull that could have cleared out an entire solar system's worth of debris. But no such objects exist close to this star or anywhere near it. An entire solar system has vanished. Now, an advanced extraterrestrial civilization could definitely make use of this matter, especially if they intended to build some kind of megastructure, like a Dyson sphere, for example. And by the way, this phenomena gets almost no press coverage. And while we're talking about strange techno-signatures, nothing can compare to the mysterious Przybylski star. Carl Sagan theorized that an alien civilization that wanted to announce their presence would place an enormous amount of materials in their star that should not be there, and this star has billions of tons of plutonium, promethium, and all kinds of other radioactive elements. Not to say that they're trying to communicate, but this could be a dumping ground of some kind for their radioactive elements in their solar system, or perhaps some kind of warning, as in, look how many nuclear weapons we have. And if it is a warning, what precisely might they be afraid of? Once again, no natural explanation comes close to explaining why this star exists or why it has such an unusual composition. Frankly, I could go on and on, from over 100 stars having mysteriously vanished, perhaps consumed by Dyson spheres, or maybe they were never stars at all, but actually powerful communications lasers. Or they might have been red dwarfs that tend to dim from time to time and might have simply appeared to have vanished. But if that was the case, then there should be at least 100 new stars that we have found since then. And that does not seem to have happened. We could talk about that, or we could also talk about things in our own solar system, such as a theorized form of life on Titan that breathes hydrogen and exhales methane, or methanogenic life, something that was theorized years ago, and surface readings taken since that time have confirmed everything in the hypothesis, indicating very strongly that such life may indeed exist. What a discovery that would be, something radically different from anything that we consider to be life. But who is the most likely to sail the seas of Titan, to take us out to explore the solar system? Who is the most aggressive about taking us out into the stars and making us into a multiplanetary civilization? Well, I think we all know the answer to that. And it's time to start getting behind this remarkable company and its vision. You know, some of you may be familiar with something called the Fermi paradox, but it goes something like this. Given all of the billions of stars in the Milky Way galaxy, and given the billions of habitable planets that we know probably exist, especially with the studies of the Kepler Space Telescope as of late, given how many habitable planets that there certainly must be a large number of extraterrestrial civilizations. And given the age of the galaxy, many billions of years, even if it took millions of years for a civilization to explore the galaxy, someone should have done it by now. So the question is, where are they? And does the Fermi paradox goes on to say that perhaps we are alone in the universe because we have found no evidence whatsoever of intelligent life. But I say that the reason that we found no evidence of intelligent life is because our standards are too high. Simple as that. We have found many, many phenomena throughout the cosmos that very strongly indicate the presence of life, including intelligent life. And yet we simply refuse to accept it because we have set the bar entirely too high. And why have we done this? Well, I'll tell you why, and I've said this before. When scientists say that they would love to discover extraterrestrial life and how much that would mean for their careers and how much that would mean for NASA funding and that sort of thing, do you know what respected scientists want much more than discovering alien life? To protect their reputations amongst their peers. That is of paramount importance to these people. And so therefore they are very hesitant, extremely hesitant to explain anything as being extraterrestrial in origin or just simple alien life in general, because of the type of criticism and the attacks that they would receive as a result. And we've seen examples of this during the course of the video. There needs to be a paradigm shift here, because as far as I'm concerned, there is no Fermi paradox. There is more than enough evidence that we have found to where we cannot dismiss it all. Perhaps some of these things have natural explanations, but not all of them. To me, the extraordinary proof that must exist is that all of these things have natural explanations and that we are alone in the universe. That is something that needs to be proven, and yet it has not. And that is something that needs to change. And I hope at some point it does. In the meantime, I'm very interested to see what happens on Mars next year. I tend to support Dr. Levin, and I firmly believe that there is something alive there, and we are going to be discovering that very soon, which will make a big change to anybody, including SpaceX, who are making their way to this mysterious world. But we will see what happens. In the meantime, 10,000 subscribers. Wow. And as you can see, I've been recognizing Patreon supporters and also members of volunteers, members of my team who have made a huge contribution to the success of this channel. Thank you very much to all of you. And as far as the rest of you folks are concerned, thank you for watching. And there are many ways to support this channel. You can buy your own Starship. You can support me through Patreon or PayPal, many, many different ways, and all of those things are in the description. But in the meantime, until the scientific community finally has a change of heart and acknowledges that we are not alone in the universe, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.